First, it was the snooker and the FA Cup final. Well, now the BRIT Awards are the latest event to have an actual live human audience as part of the government's live events pilot scheme. A total of 4,000 spectators will get to watch the biggest night in British music at the O2 next month. And once they're in, no social distancing, no masks. It is the largest indoor capacity pilot event. Dr. Sarah Pitt is a virologist at the University of Brighton and a fellow of the Institute of Biomedical Science. Good morning. How
Good morning.
anxious does this make you feel to hear of an event and people mixing like this?
Well, on the face of it, it does seem like it's a little bit too early to be indoors with no social distancing. But on the other hand, it is part of an experiment. And so we have got to try these things and see what happens, I think. So they're doing they're testing people with a lateral flow test before the event. And I think I may have been on your program before more than once saying that I'm not a big fan of the lateral flow tests. But people are then going to be tested, register for track and trace, and then be tested by the main laboratory PCR a few days after the event. So actually, from my point of view as a laboratory diagnostic scientist, it's going to be all these experiments are really interesting because we'll get a lot of useful data about how the lateral flow test actually performs and whether it's actually worth doing or not.
That's a really good point, actually, isn't it? Because so many question marks over lateral flow tests. And it's worth saying that these are not ones to be self-administered at home. They will have to go to a venue. So they will be, in theory, properly administered. The other
Yeah.
thing is, these are all key workers who've been invited to apply. So there's a very good chance that all of them will have had at least one jab of the vaccine, if not two.
Yes, that's right. That was my next point that I was going to make, and so that's also good because it will be a test of how well the vaccine's actually working. The other thing which I think is quite interesting is that although there's no social distancing, it's going to be a fifth of the capacity of the venue. I think they were saying on their website, I was just checking it up, that it's partly because of constraints of the organisation of the building. It's not that they're necessarily going to be able to spread out that much. But I think it will be quite interesting to see how people do behave, particularly if they're being key workers and essential workers. They're very aware of how infectious the disease is, the virus is, and how nasty the disease is. Whether we're actually it'd be a good test of how wary we are of each other when we do all
Well,
start.
yes, although even key workers are not immune to a glass or two of wine and inhibitions perhaps slightly dropping in those circumstances. But also fascinating around the whole issue of aerosol transmission and dispersal of aerosols. And if you're in a sort of huge cavernous venue like the O2, will that help? Very different to like a low ceiling nightclub, right?
Yes, and so it's all of those things which we will actually be able to find out. And I think you were talking about the snooker earlier. I was watching it after your researcher had asked me to come on the program this morning. I watched the snooker, and not just to see what it would look like in there. And of course, people are sitting very quietly with their masks on. So that's sort of phase one of the test. And this is sort of phase two. They don't have masks and they're jumping around, as you say. I was just thinking when they first come, what will their inhibitions loosen over the course of the evening? When you first come in, will people be a little bit wary, and obviously they're going to be maybe laughing, shouting, perhaps singing along, I don't know. So that'll be, this is sort of the next stage of what we're going to do. And just, we do need to see how it goes.
Do the likes of you, just finally, do you get your hands on any of this data?
No, because I'm not part of the experimental team, but I'd really love to be. It's the sort of thing
Love
I'd
to
really
see
love
it.
to be able to do. And I'm sure once the teams actually publish the data and it's in the public domain, I'll be looking at it very closely because to me it's really very, very interesting.
Yeah, poring over it, and I'm sure that will happen at some stage. Thank you so much for talking to us, Dr. Sarah Pitt, reacting to the news that the BRIT Awards will be inviting 4,000 people in without masks and no social distancing.